Well, good morning and welcome back to our daily devotional series again. This morning we continue our study in the book of Psalms, working our way for the moment anyway, working them through them from beginning to end. No guarantee that we'll do that, and hopefully we'll not get anywhere near the end before the stay-at-home orders are reversed. But this morning we're in Psalm number 8, a brilliant piece of literature from David. Features all types of things found in Hebrew poetry, various types, all combined into one particular psalm. There's parallelism, ideas that run parallel with each other. There's a form of style called chiasm, where the ideas build or crescendo, where they crisscross in the middle. All kinds of ideas that are double meanings, talking about this, but he also could be talking about that. It's just a brilliant piece of artistic work coming from the pen of David. So let's read Psalm number 8. And let's see what David has to say today to encourage us and to perhaps challenge us. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babies and infants, you have established strength because of your foes to still the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you're mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heaven and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the sea. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Obviously, hearing it out loud, you hear the bookends, the things that he says I'm ultimately writing about. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth, in verse 1. Same thing said again in verse 8 or verse 9 as he packages it together. All these things he says in between point to the glory of God's name. How majestic is it in all the earth? He begins by thinking about babies. He says in verse 2, out of the mouth of babies and infants. Ever heard the saying, out of the mouths of babe? There it is, coming from verse 2. It says, even babies know what the enemies, the fools of God do not know. It says, out of the mouth of babies and infants, you have established strength because of your foes to still the enemy and the avenger. He says, I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you've set in place. All of those things point to the glory of God. Skipping the middle for the moment, looking then at the repeat, the return pattern, if you will, as he comes down off of the peak of the psalm. He starts there in verse 8, or verse 5, that is. You've talked about man. Verse 6, you've given him dominion over the works of your hands. So we've looked at the stars in verse 3. Now we're looking at the works of God's hands. The stars are above our head. Now here in verse 6, we're looking at the things that are under our feet. He's talked about out of the mouths of babies declaring God's glory. Here in verse 6, 7, and 8, he's talking about the animals, the sheep, the oxen, the beasts of the field, birds, fish, things that walk along, if you will, crawl along the bottom of the seabed. And so we're building up from O Lord, our Lord, and towards the end we're building back, if you will, down to it. It's in the middle that is David's key point. In light of all the glory of creation and all the wonderful things God's created, verse 4, what is man that you're mindful of him? Out of all the creation, out of all the great majestic animals, out of the infinitude of stars out there, what's man that you pay such close attention to him? Why are you interested in humankind? Why are you concerned for what's going on in this small little corner of the universe? What is man that you're mindful of him? Parallel, the Son of Man, that you care for him. David is pondering the beauty, the wonder of the fact that out of all the things that God has created, all the things that point to his glory, man is at the center of that creation. Now, as we study the book of Genesis, we see that in Genesis chapter 1, as he describes the creation of the universe. We often get hung up in how old the earth is and when was this done, and did God do it literally in 24-hour day periods? Don't miss the main point of Genesis 1, that God is king. He created a universe, and the high point of his creation is mankind. He talks about day 6 of the 7 days in chapter 1, more than any of the other days. It's a longer description, more words committed to it. And on day 6, he talks about the creation of man more than any other thing that he's ever created. More words dedicated to the creation of humankind than the entire universe itself in one sense. And that's because man is created in the image of God, according to Genesis 1. That's why God cares about man. That's what makes him mindful of him. That's why God cares for the Son of Man. Because of all the creation, we're the one thing created to be in his image, the one thing to be created like him, the one thing created for eternal relationship with him. But of course, Genesis 3 undermines that story. Sin enters in, it ruins it, and yet that leads to David's wonderment here. Even in light of sin, God's still aware of man. He knows what's going on. He's aware of the situation. He cares for him. And so David is awestruck. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name that you care for us in spite of us. But there's even something more profound in Psalm number 8. As I hinted at a few moments ago, there's a double-edged meaning. He's talking about man as being a high point of creation and then being stunned that God still cares about us given the low point of our creation there in Genesis 3 in the fall of man. But the beauty of this psalm is that the center, the peak, the crescendo of it also, according to the book of Hebrews, points to Jesus. Here's why God cares about man, and here's how much God cares about man. What is man that you're mindful of him? The Son of Man that you care for him? That God created man for his glory, for a relationship with him. Sin undermines it. And then Jesus, the Son of Man, the Messiah, comes and he fixes it. He makes it right. He turns it around. He makes it what it ought to have been once more. And so in Hebrews chapter 2, the argument is that Jesus is superior than all the other created beings, all the other modes of salvation that have been proffered or pursued, all the language of the Old Testament. The writer of Hebrews says it's all about him. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 5, he says, for it was not to angels that God subjected the world to come, of which we're speaking, eternity, salvation. It has been testified somewhere, what is man that you're mindful of him, or the Son of Man that you care for him? You've made him a little lower than the angels, and you've crowned him with glory and honor, and you put everything under, or in subjection under his feet. Now, in putting everything in subjection to him, he left nothing outside of his control. At present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him, but we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, made human, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. What is man that God is mindful of him? He created him in his image, and then he sent his Son, the perfect image of the invisible God, in the flesh, that he might suffer and die, that he might taste death for us, that we might be restored to fellowship with him, so that we might, with David, authentically and eternally proclaim, O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Thank God that he cares. He cared about our sin, and even today in the midst of this virus and the pandemic and all the turmoil it's caused, God still cares. God's still aware. But the ultimate thing we need to be aware of is he sent his Son. He died on the cross for sins he did not commit, so that sinners like us might have eternal hope in him. Do you know that for a fact? Have you trusted it? And are you living accordingly? O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name.